Because you know.
I know.
You know what's coming next.
Hey guys, Pete here. It's week 2 of Lalo haunting everyone who's ever met him in our main story. When you try to pull off a big plan, it's important to know your enemy. But what about when your enemy knows you? Howard knows who's behind the latest attempt to destroy his reputation, and Gus knows that Lalo can't move forward with his plan until he has the blessing of the cartel. 2 different worlds, 2 different chess matches, and since this is a prequel, 2 different sets of stakes. This was not my favorite episode of Better Call Saul's final season to sit through, but they are setting up some fascinating maneuvering on both sides of the story. We'll get into all of that right after this quick spoiler warning. If you haven't watched Better Call Saul Season 6 Episode 5 yet, then this video won't be for you. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Before this season started, it was hard to imagine Gus losing his cool, let alone breaking under pressure. Now it's hard to imagine a scenario where he doesn't put a definitive end to the threat that is Lalo before this season concludes, because he can't be the character we know from Breaking Bad and still be this worried about him. In Black and Blue, we see him trying to distract himself from the threat by going about his normal business at his restaurant. You see him check his ankle holster before going out front and then see that he's completely distracted while dealing with a customer. This has all been building up since he knocked over the glass a few episodes ago. And when he goes outside and looks into the distance here, you can see that he's starting to crack. Later, Mike is snuck into his house to tell him that there's still no news and that it's become a waiting game. This not knowing is what is really getting to Gus. His lack of control over the situation. Him using his time to clean the grout in the bathroom with a toothbrush is a great illustration of this. They visit the Superlab site where Mike reassures him that no one can get inside. Gus then goes and has a look around. He finds a marker on a cord that's laying on the ground and counts off paces to a spot where he stashes a gun. At first, this feels like a backup plan just in case Lalo discovers the lab, but if you think about it, this is probably him taking back some control. He knows that Lalo needs to discover this place as proof to show that he's acting against the cartel. So what if he just uses that against him? And we'll come back around to this at the end after I finish the recap. Kim's attempt to take back control at 3 in the morning is a little less dramatic, but it's coming from the same place. Putting a chair under the door handle is fairly useless, but you have to think of something when you're so worried you can't sleep. Jimmy is lucky in that he still believes Lalo's dead, but he still can't shake off the fear either. He gives Kim the perfect opportunity to let him in on the secret, but she decides that keeping him in the dark is the best course of action. This is interesting since they could be going through this together, and it does make you wonder about her motivation. Is it what Mike said? Is she worried it will break him more? Or is she just concerned with his being able to play his part in their continued assault on Howard? I'm not sure if she knows, just like I'm not sure how she feels about what Viola tells her when they meet up at the El Camino. She starts out there with an apology for how she left Schweikart because she imagines her old assistant had to clean up some of the mess. Then we find out that Viola has been moved from the Mesa Verde account to Sandpiper. When Kim casually mentions she'd heard that too, we understand that this isn't a social visit, that she set the meeting to try to gather some information. She does get some of that. She finds out who the judge on their first mediation session is, and then the conversation turns to how much Viola admires what Kim's doing. Sometimes she questions all of what she does and thinks it's great that Kim could walk away from that to help the little guy. When she says she makes her feel better about the law, Kim gives her a half-hearted smile and takes a sip of her coffee, sort of looking away. It's all a good reminder of what they're risking in trying to push the settlement ahead, and the disconnect between how people see Kim compared to what she's currently doing, and just how unnecessary taking down Howard seems. We get to see him in his glory when he picks up the ball that Aaron fumbled at Sandpiper and runs with it. He's able to convince his clients, the tenants there, who are all getting tired of waiting for this settlement, that it's worth it. And this is impressive, considering their age and the fact that they don't have forever to wait. What's funny is that Cliff had noticed some nervous energy as he was bouncing his leg in his seat before he stood up, and so he takes this moment to confront him about having a drug problem. It gets better when Howard, who can't believe what he's hearing, denies it, but Cliff's been primed by his addict son's lying, so he doesn't believe him. He tells him there's no harm in asking for help, and by this point, Howard has put it all together. In typical Howard fashion, he stops to thank him for his concern since he knows he came to him as a friend and it must have been hard, and then tells him he doesn't have a drug problem, he has a Jimmy McGill problem. He excuses himself to make a phone call, and then delivers one of the best Howard lines ever when he tells his secretary to cancel his week. We catch up with Jimmy's continuing transformation into Saul as he fills Francesca in on all the changes that have been going on since he last saw her. Yes, there's no more Kim, and he's standing in the middle of an office that is just one step up from a burnout abandoned building, but he's really busy and willing to double her salary with an additional signing bonus. I love that she drove up listening to a Wilson Phillips song that is 15 years old in the show's timeline, and that she negotiated to have a say in the decorating. That point is curious considering we know what this office ends up looking like, and it makes you wonder because it always seemed like she had been worn down by her time with Saul when we first meet her in the main series. Her quick negotiating skills here seem to be consistent with other instances where we saw her extracting cash from people, so maybe there's more to Francesca than meets the eye. Later that night, she sends Jimmy to a boxing gym to meet a potential new client named Mr. Ward. It turns out to be Howard, who challenges him to a boxing match. This is a meeting that we knew was coming from the trailers, and I honestly never thought that there would be any actual boxing. But there is, and it's an awkward affair, which is kind of why I didn't think it would happen. The way it's shot points out the ridiculousness. Like, there's how it looks in your head when you hand Jimmy a beating, and then there's what it really looks like, which is what we see here, and I guess that's an interesting point to make even if it's not a lot of fun to watch. What's more interesting here is what they say to each other. Of course, Howard was always going to figure out Jimmy was behind this, and he points out that they didn't even try to cover their tracks, which he thinks means that they were trying to get caught. After it's over, he tells him that he's mistaken his kindness for weakness, and that he'd like to think that this would be enough, that this would be the end, but he doesn't believe that's the case. When he goes outside, he meets with his private investigator, telling him that he needs to know everyone that he talks to and everywhere he goes. And when Jimmy leaves, we see him follow him. This brings up a lot of questions because we know that Mike has people following Jimmy that he never noticed. There's potential here that Mike's guys will notice Howard's guys or vice versa, and that their two worlds will come in contact with each other. Kim's waiting at home, and there's a nice shot where she smiles as she watches Jimmy pull up, and then that drops whenever she sees that he's holding ice on his head. Inside, she catches him up on what happened with Viola and shows him a picture of the judge. He makes a remark about liking his handlebar mustache, and that might be a hint that they're going to try to impersonate him. What stood out the most here was that neither one of them was concerned at all about Howard figuring out that they were behind everything that's happened to him. This lines up with my theory that it was part of their plan, and they added a little bit more to think about. At the gym, he had a chance to walk away and just leave Howard unsatisfied, but he chose to go back and take him up on the fight. He makes a point of saying he didn't know what he was thinking, and Kim tells him that he had his reasons. She says it was because he knows what's coming next. And to me, this made it sound like he has guilt over what they're about to do. She grabs his hand to comfort him as they turn out the light. And even though he's become a willing participant, fully on board with making this work, this reinforces that she's still the one pulling the strings. I haven't mentioned the opening teaser yet, and considering what it turned out to be, I'm not at all surprised that I totally misinterpreted what was happening in those scenes from the trailer. It turns out Werner's crew had his slide rule encased in resin or something like that, and gave it to his wife as a gift. We saw him pull this out of his bag in his first appearance when he was looking at the laundry site with Mike. This turns out to be important when Lalo shows up in Germany to track Mrs. Ziegler down. He's back, and he's smooth as ever as he makes the approach and gets information about her husband over drinks. If you watch these scenes out of context, you would have no idea what was going on with this character. He's completely at home in this situation. He coaxes out the cover story, that her husband died in a cave-in, but can't learn more about what they were building because she doesn't know. He nearly seduces her. He does walk her home, but she doesn't invite him in even after he tells her he's flying back tomorrow. He waits all night until he sees her leave for work the next morning and then sneaks into the house. I don't know about anyone else because this was a tense sequence, but my real fear here was that he was going to kill the dog. They introduced Little Bear when they approached the house, and knowing this character and what he's capable of, it just didn't seem like he was safe. Much to my relief, his charms extend to the animal kingdom, and he's even able to calm this little guy speaking a foreign language. He looks around the house and doesn't find anything useful, and the tension reaches a new level when Marguerite comes back to get her phone. The dog alerts her that something is wrong, and Lalo gets his gun ready as she approaches the steps. While he's considering his options, he sees the slide rule and connects it to what she said about his workers sending keepsakes rather than attending the funeral. The translation of the inscription reads, "With love, your boys." And he notices that the company that made its name is on the bottom. He can use that to find out who commissioned the piece and then go to them for answers about what they were working on. He does one of his super Lalo moves and leaves out of the second floor window, which Frau Ziegler finds open when she comes in that room. If he killed her, it probably would have set off some alarms inside Gus's organization. And since Lalo doesn't know that he thinks he's still alive, this went about as good as he could hope. Little Bear and Marguerite will both live to see another day, and the episode ends as she closes the window, which is the mirror image of the way that the opening teaser started. It was good to get some Lalo, and there's some interesting stuff going on, but as I mentioned at the beginning, this wasn't my favorite episode of the season. It's probably my least favorite. The pacing was similar to last week, but I thought the Wendy caper was a lot funnier than the fight, and was more interested in the character development in that one. I think the prequel factor has a lot to do with it. Gus being paranoid is just not that interesting because we know he comes out on top of this situation. The interesting part of that is how he'll manage to pull it off, and of course that does require setup. His going to the lab and taking back some control felt necessary, and it appears that he's putting a plan together. Though I wasn't 100% on what they were going for. When he got distracted at Los Pollos, it was right after he mentioned the signature spice curls, and that made me think of the magical meeting last season when he first introduced those. I guess this was the first step in him putting it together that Lalo would pursue the Germans. Then he can somehow lead him to the site through them. The way he placed the gun, it made it seem like it was part of a plan or a trap even, but it's not clear how he's planning to lure Lalo in yet. The other thing that is starting to wear on me a little is that they're keeping us behind the characters as far as what they're planning. This started with them cutting away from their conversation at the El Camino in the first episode, and now they've planned out this whole operation without letting us in on any of the details. Our being in the dark should make for some good reveals, but it also lessens my investment. Last week when we saw Kim and Jimmy alone, I felt like we were getting insights as to what they were thinking. This week I just kept thinking that I didn't know what they were up to. That said, the Kim and Viola scene was really good. I liked how she was bringing up all this stuff that was in direct conflict with what Kim is actually doing at the moment. And they did manage to develop Howard some in his discovering what they were up to. When I was making my Howard video the other day, I realized just how much we don't know about this character. So it was good to see that they put some layers there, and I'm curious to see how they proceed now that he's actively fighting back. The PI thing seems like it could create real problems, and could even be the thing that brings the two stories together some in Lalo's absence. That does not seem good for Howard, who exists in a place that's a comfortable distance from any cartel activity. I just can't really see how that might be something that would improve his situation. So all in all, it was mostly set up with an injection of charm and menace from south of the border. I really like what they're doing with everyone anticipating their enemy's next move, but wish we had more of an idea of what they're thinking. I have full confidence that it'll add to the impact of what's to come, and can't wait to see what that is. There's 2 more to go before the mid-season break. I expect that things will pick up from here, and I think that's a good place to leave things. Let me know in the comments what you think about this episode and where you think things will go from here. We'll be getting together for the live stream on Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern to dig in a little deeper. So come join us for that and make sure to bring your questions. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.